All right, y'all. Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about section 2.2. Last class, we talked about 2.1, and this is on page 68 and 69 of your workbook. So if you have your workbook, be on those pages. We are going to do examples 1, 2, and 3 today, okay? If you don't have a workbook, just put it on another piece of paper, and then make sure you submit this after you write these down, okay? So last class, we talked about vertex form. So just to review real quick, we remember vertex form was y equals a parentheses x minus h squared plus k. So this is what we did last class in 2.1, okay? And we were able to figure out what the vertex was by looking at that. Remember, the vertex was h and k, right? The h moved the graph left or right. The k moved the graph up or down. Okay? Today, we are going to talk about what is called standard form. So it's just another way to write a quadratic. Right? And remember, a quadratic always has a square in it. Right? So every problem that you see today is going to have a square in that thing. Okay? All right, y'all. Well, I got interrupted in my recording, so you're probably wondering why I was a little choppy there. So now we are going to talk about standard form today. I wasn't really sure where I ended up, but standard form looks like this: y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So this is called standard form. And notice that it has a square in it, so it's a quadratic. All right. Anytime the biggest exponent is a square, we call it a quadratic. Now we're going to do the same thing on this problem. The vertex in standard form is still the letters h and k. Okay, it's still h and k, but you notice there's no h or k in the problem, so I can't just pick it out like I did in vertex form. All right. So to figure out what the vertex is in this problem, to figure out what h is, we are going to use this formula. H equals negative b over 2a. That is how we are going to figure out what h is. And then once we figure out k, once we figure out h, we're going to plug that in and figure out what k is. Okay, so notice b is in front, or a is in front of the x squared, and b is in front of the x. Okay, so remember that for this very first problem. So this first problem says, what is the vertex of the graph? And it gives you this equation. This is standard form. So ax squared plus bx plus c. So all we are going to do is use this equation to figure out what h is first. So h equals negative b. Okay, so a would be 1 in this problem, b would be negative 8, and c would be 5. Right? A, b, c. So let's just plug it in. Negative b, negative, and b is negative 8. So negative 8 over 2 times a, and the a is 1 because there wasn't a number there. So we're going to simplify this thing. These two negatives become a positive. 2 times 1 is 2, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So I now know that h, right, my h value of my vertex is 4. Okay, so I'm going to put the answer up here. So 4, comma, now I need to figure out what k is. Okay, now in a normal problem, right, a point is always x and y. So think of h kind of like your x, right? And I have this 4, and then I have this problem. So I'm going to take this 4, and I'm going to plug it in everywhere I see an x. So that would give me 4 squared minus 8 times 4 plus 5. Right, so I took this number that I just found and put it in place of the x's. And then I'm just going to solve it. 4 squared is 16. 8 minus 4, or 8 times 4 is 32. And add 5. 16 minus 32 is negative 16 plus 5, which is negative 11. So my vertex of this problem is 4, comma, negative 11. Okay, 4, comma, negative 11. Whoops, I keep moving the paper on you. 4, negative 11 is the vertex. So this is h, this is k. So no matter what form we're in, we can still figure out what the vertex is. Okay? All right, the second example says use key features to graph the function. Okay, so we need a couple of things in order to do this. All right? So the first thing that we are going to need is the vertex, right? We have to know what the vertex is in order to graph it. So the vertex, again, remember, is h and k, but this is standard form. Okay, so I'm going to need the vertex. So in standard form, I'm going to use this formula to find the vertex. H equals negative b over 2a. So once again, a would be 1, b would be negative 6, and c would be negative 1. Okay, so let's just plug them in. Negative 6 over 2 times 1. So this would become positive 6 over 2, which is 3. So the first part of my vertex is 3. All right? Once we get that number, we take that number, and we're going to plug it in for the x's in the original problem that we were given. Okay? So I'm going to take that 3 and plug it in. So it would be 3 squared minus 6 times 3 minus 1. 3 squared is 9. 6 times 3 is 18 minus 1. 9 minus 18 is negative 9 minus 1. Negative 9 minus 1 is negative 10. So my vertex is 3, negative 10. Okay, positive 3 and negative 10 is my vertex. All right? So there's one other thing that I need in order to make the graph as accurate as possible. Okay? One other thing that I am going to find, and that is going to be the y-intercept. Okay? So I'm going to write it over here on the side. Kind of running out of room on my sheet. But to find the y-intercept, all right, like we talked about in the very first day of this class, you are going to put 0 in for all the x's. So wherever you see an x in the problem, you're going to plug a 0 in. So if we did that, it would give us 0 squared minus 6 times 0 minus 1. 0 squared is 0. 6 times 0 is 0 minus 1. That's negative 1. So my y-intercept is going to be negative 1. That's really the only points that I need in order to graph this for right now. Okay, we'll get to a little bit more kind of as we go. So let's just make a rough sketch of a graph here. Now it's kind of hard because negative 10 isn't really going to fit, but I'm going to make it look like this. So here's going to be my x-axis way up top, and there's going to be my y-axis. So this is x, this is y. Okay, I know it looks a little funky, but 3, negative 10. So go over 3, 1, 2, 3, and then I don't have enough space for 10, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm just going to say it's down here. Okay, just down there towards the bottom. All right, doesn't exactly fit, but that's okay. And then the y-intercept is negative 1. So I'm going to put a point right there for negative 1. And then we already know that this graph, right, has to be the same on both sides. Right? It has to be symmetrical. Okay? So this point right here, let's say, remember in the very first day with vertex form we talked about the axis of symmetry? If I drew a line right down the middle right here, right, this graph has to be the same on both sides. So this point has to be the same on the other side. Okay, but I don't really have enough room there. All right, so I'm just going to sketch this graph. So it is going to look something like this. And the reason, that looks ridiculous there, that should be straight. The reason why this graph is going up is because it's positive. The x squared is positive. Okay? You guys have Desmos, so you will be able to graph it, right, and make sure that your graph looks like the graph of the problem. Okay? Don't be afraid to use Desmos. I want you to use it. But I also want you to know how to solve it by hand. Okay? Desmos will give you all of these numbers. It will give you the vertex, and it will give you the y-intercept. But I want to make sure you can do it by hand as well. Okay? At least for this part. On your test and quiz, it's not really going to matter. All right? Okay, the very last problem. It's question 3. So it says a water balloon was thrown from a window. The height of the balloon over time can be modeled by this function. What is the maximum height of the water balloon after it was thrown? There is one key word in this problem. Okay? Whenever you hear this word, maximum, or minimum. When you hear maximum or minimum, you need to find the vertex. Okay? So all we have to do for this problem is to figure out what the vertex is. Okay? That's all we have to figure out. Okay? They actually gave us a graph. which makes it really, really easy, which we'll talk about in a second. But let's do it by hand first, just to make sure we know how to do it. So the vertex, okay, remember it's always H and K, but this is standard form. So we're going to use that formula we talked about at the beginning. Negative B over 2A. So B in this case is 160. So negative 160 over 2 times negative 16. Okay? So that would be negative 160 divided by negative 32. And if you divided those, you would get a positive 5. So my vertex, the first part, the H value of my vertex is 5. Okay? And remember, we take that number to find the second half of the vertex, right? To find the K value, we take that 5 and we plug it in. So that would be negative 16 times 5 squared plus 160 times 5 plus 50. And we're going to solve this thing. Okay, now we're going to get some big numbers here, and that's okay. If you put this in your calculator, just like this with parentheses, 5 squared is 25 times 16 is negative 400. 160 times 5 is 800, and then plus 50. And if you added that up, you would get, out of room over here, but 450. So my answer to this problem, the vertex is 5, 450, right? But it's asking us for the maximum height of the water balloon. It didn't ask us to find the vertex, right? We had to find the vertex to get the answer. But it doesn't say what's the vertex of this equation. It wants the maximum height. And if you look at our graph, okay, if you look at the graph, look, you have time on the x-axis and height on the y-axis. So the actual answer to this problem right here is 450 feet, because the y value is the height. So we don't really care about the 5 right here, because that's the amount of time. So it took 5 seconds for this water balloon to get to 450 feet. So this is actually our answer. Okay? And since they gave us a graph, we can look, here's 5, and there is 450, right? That's the vertex. That's the very top of the graph. Okay? So those are our notes for 2.2 standard form. All right, you guys have your Math Excel assignment. Please make sure you do it and submit it. Also, make sure you submit a picture of your notes so you can get credit for that. All right, guys. Thank you. Peace out.